that was one of his projects. And so he designed the glowworm, and given all of his work throughout toys and furniture, it was always his favorite because he liked this idea that if a child was scared, that maybe he made
Yeah.
their day better. But he used to sit in meetings at Design Yard and sketch. He also did My Little Pony, and I
Oh my
mean,
God.
it
Really?
was bizarre. He could freehand sketch it as if it were lifted from an advertisement, like
Wow.
perfectly. Yeah.
That is hilarious.
Heidi's an artist as well. So just like that talent is one I do not have.
I'm more of abstract artist.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's a good thing. It's good for our lives to be surrounded by art.
Yeah. All right. Welcome to another day in the Matrix, everybody. We are thrilled to have Ryan Anderson here for our podcast today. And this is one of those unique stories in the corporate world where his story, maybe that's what we're going to find out today. I haven't talked with Ryan very extensively, even though we work together. His story seems to mimic some of my own, where I didn't like my job for over a decade. I really, and I don't use this word hate, but I hated doing what I was doing and getting up and going to work every day. And deliberately through a series of job changes and mentorships was able to create a role within the company I work for that was unique, that suited my skills. And I literally generated what it was I wanted to be doing in the corporate world. I think that's available to everybody in the corporate world. So anybody listening to this podcast, if you use that word hate and you hate your job and you hate going into work every day, maybe, you blame it on your coworkers or you blame it on your boss or whatever it is, there's always a path forward to change what it is you're doing and do something that you absolutely love to do. And if you didn't catch one of our previous podcasts with James True talking about the corporation as a symbiotic relationship rather than looking at it as a corporate parasite, which it's in a lot of people's minds and memes these days, I think it's a really useful way to set up your corporate career and have a better life experience. So I'm really looking forward to talking with Ryan today. Heidi, any words before we get started?
No, I'm really excited to hear your story, Ryan. And one of the first things that we always start off with our podcast is story time. So we would love for you to share. I think specifically, we have kind of preempted you with, is there a story that comes to mind where maybe you have some kind of negative experience that turned into a positive corporate experience? Because we don't want this podcast to be all just like negative corporate, obviously. What Thaddeus just said, it's about like changing your mindset, changing your belief system, changing your energy and your frequency. And I'm a frequency coach, so I'm all about changing the frequency, and it's not others, it's like, it's you, right? So can you just share with us a little bit what comes to
Sure.
mind? Yeah.
Well, first, thank you both for having me. This is a real treat for me, particularly given that I have personal relationships with you. So thank you for including me. And yeah, I would start by saying I don't know that there were a lot of times in my career that I hated working in corporate. I've had maybe a little bit of a love-hate relationship, but my bigger issue was feeling a sense of belonging and fit for what the sort of jobs that you might find in a typical job posting might be. There were years and years of like, well, it feels like this is right. I'll try it, only to feel like, I don't know, am I any good at this? And am I getting bored, or what should I be doing next? But there are two stories that come to my mind. And part of this is that I'm at the cusp of my 30th anniversary. Next month will be 30 years since I started my first internship within within our industry, this whole area of contract furnishings. And I grew up working retail. My mom owned a little gift store. I'd worked at a wallpaper store. And my very first experience in an office was kind of comical. It wasn't bad. This is actually a good story, but I'll follow it with one that maybe is not quite as good. I started working in an office environment. I'd never been in any sort of office space. I'd seen a few desks in the back of a retail store, but I was working for this guy named Dan, and I had just started my internship. And in retail, if you've ever worked like a retail floor, you really need to make sure everybody knows where you are. Like you're part of a team, you're communicating if I'm going to go take, lunch or whatever. And so I was sitting at a desk, and a couple hours in, I went over to my manager, Dan's desk, and said, "Hey, Dan, I'm going to go use the bathroom." And because that's what you do in retail. Like, I'm going to leave the floor or whatever. And he looked at me and went, all right. So I went to the bathroom, and a couple minutes later I came back and I was like, hey, Dan, I'm back from the bathroom. And he went, okay. This went on for 3 days. And finally he pulled me over and he went, yeah, why do you keep telling me when you go to the bathroom? And I was like, well, I've only worked retail. Like, I wouldn't want to leave the floor without telling you. And he smiled and he said, not only do I not need to know when you go to the bathroom, I definitely don't want to know. I trust you. You just need to get your work done, and I don't need to supervise you. So that was actually my first story. And it was a very positive one because it was an example, or my first example, of a manager who said, you don't need to be worried about being supervised. Like, I just need you to get your work done. Years later, I remember I had a very different experience. And I'm somebody who subscribes to this notion that people tend to join a company but quit a boss. And I joined a team with a guy who was leading a team who was very friendly, very positive. I thought it would be a good fit, but there was something up. Like, a couple days in, I was noticing that he didn't respond in very affirming ways to a lot of the ideas of different team members during our meetings and calls. This is at a totally different employer than where I am now, by the way. And eventually I began to see, and we all did, that there were a few ideas that he might put his little, like a twist on and then really promote, but a lot of them that he just ignored. And what became clear was that I think he was a bit more interested in what ideas could advance his standing and career than what was actually going to help our team to go get what we needed to get done. And so it was unfortunate. And I remember being really dismayed and a little bit trapped, because I've typically subscribed to this idea that you should stick around in a role for 18 months or a couple years before you move on. That may be a little bit less true than what it was, but I remember like 3 or 4 months into that particular role thinking, what are we doing here? Like, we're just trying to help this guy to gain more visibility. And I made the difficult choice after about 8 months to go ahead and find something else internally, and I took it, which the optics weren't great. I don't think he was particularly happy. In that particular instance, I think later I learned that he was having other issues internally and exited the organization, and it wasn't necessarily a black eye for me. But the stories that come to my mind are as much about managers and how they lead as life in corporate America, but it is different because if you're part of a big company, you're part of a much larger entity that sometimes doesn't have that direct line of accountability of a smaller organization. And so where you find yourself is a huge part of your overall experience.
Yeah, I've worked for the biggest of corporations. I started out at Procter and Gamble, and I've worked for the smallest startup organizations, and they run so differently. And I would liken the smallest organization, oddly, to like the worst military boot camp I have ever set foot inside of. And it almost harkens back to your retail experience with, if I think about how the school systems, like at least the public schooling systems are set up, like it's very, you need a hall pass to even walk out and go to the bathroom. You not only need permission, but you need, well, now they're electronic, but you need like
No, they don't let them go anymore. I'm just kidding.
you need like a permission to do everything, like including taking care of your essential needs, like going to the bathroom.
Mhm.
And that's how we train people through the
Mm.
system. We don't train them to be expansive and learn how to think and question and find an answer. We train people to get the answer the teacher needs them to get the state sponsored testing correct so the teachers can get their raise. And then we supervise them so closely. When we move into a retail environment, it's a lot of people that are younger working in those environments. And they have to be, well, we think we have to manage them so closely. And we get so used to that, as a working style, that when you're actually given the freedom to do things, a lot of people fail. And I think that's what I was striving for,
Mm.
is like, give me freedom. I know what needs to get done. Just give me the ability to do it. But a lot of people, they get so used to just being told what to do that they almost crave some of that so that they don't, quote unquote, think they're doing something wrong. And that's what I think, some of this early training leads to people having a bad experience.
Hmm.
So as we talk about the corporate experience in general, Ryan, I think you're somebody who has a lot of insight into this based on your role. I'm pretty sure you've talked with a lot of people throughout other organizations about their own experiences. But like, what do you think it is about people and corporations that lead so many people to have this negative corporate experience?
Well, I'll start back with this idea of management, and you might be familiar with a social scientist named Douglas McGregor, who came up with this framework of theory X, theory Y. I mean,
Hmm.
the basic framework is a theory X organization believes that people don't really want to work, and you kind of have to force them into going and being productive to deliver the outcomes that you want. Whereas a theory Y organization says, no, people want to be productive and achieve things. It's the job of the manager to clear the path and make sure they're equipped to do so. I've been really fortunate. In 30 years, I've worked for some great organizations, very, very theory Y organizations by and large. But when you start getting into organizations that fundamentally don't trust their employees, believe that the employees are likely going to be doing, place their own interests in front of those of the organization, and slack off and need to have direct line of supervision, it's not empowering. It's not equipping. It just fosters this feeling of mistrust, and it's tough. I've certainly encountered many, because I'm in a research role, and because a lot of what I do today is focused on looking at the future of work and how different organizations manage it. The culture does come from the top, but there's often a backstory. There's an origin story behind every organization, and organizations can evolve and improve just like any other entity. But often the backstory tells you a lot about, kind of the mindset of how an organization goes about its business and how they feel about their employees.
So you think that organizational origin story and the mindset of the organization itself is ultimately what leads to happier or unhappy employees?
It's part of it. It's part of it. I mean, it's pretty cliche to say culture, and culture is one of those terms that I think is easily debated, but most organizations have an operating model and a general philosophy about how they view their employees, their suppliers, their customers, et cetera. And there are disruptive moments in organizations that can significantly shape or reshape those, but often there's something in the roots of the organization, some sort of folklore, some sort of whatever stories or narratives are foundational for how that company views its success, that tends to perpetuate how it operates in the future. The trouble is, when you're going in to interview for an organization, you might be able to see the website, you might get a little sense of its brand out in the market. You'll meet probably a very nice HR person, and hopefully the manager that you're working for comes off as professional. But it takes a while to start picking up some of those tacit signals that are not always clearly communicated. And I do think people, just because we all need to work and provide for our lives, sometimes find themselves in an organization that they might know on some level isn't great. It's kind of like being in a relationship, is not great, and are too risk averse to make a change. But there's a penalty that comes with staying too long. There's culture, and then there's acculturation, and we don't like to think that we take on the characteristics of the organizations we're a part of. But it's just like in your life, you tend to hang out, like whoever you're friends with, you tend to start behaving more like them. And so I think the real risk is that, or people find themselves in organizations that are not operating in healthy ways, and before they know it, they're not either.
Well, it was that statistic that you were finding, right, Heidi, that said we spend the majority of our waking lives, after age whatever, 20, with our coworkers. Like, who do you spend the most time with during the week for the majority of your life? And it's not your parents, it's your coworkers. And so getting yourself in, and that was where I was at. Like, I was in some very hostile environments in my early career. And I just knew that it was not the right fit. It is not where I wanted to spend my day. It wasn't bringing me up. And so I kept moving organizations till, I've been with the organization I'm with now for 17 years, which is a really long time. I spent a decade trying to find that organization and kind of my fit. I know you're going to ask a question here. So
I have a few things to say. I do want to just say also, like, that's why I never went into the corporate world. I mean, I surrounded myself with artists and artist friends, right? Like, but there's also like a negative aspect to that as well.
True,
um,
but I think the corporate world needs more artists.
I
So
would, I would
I
say, yeah,
respect your choice, but I also wish
yeah,
more of us got a chance to work with
that's
people
true.
like you.
Yeah. Well, okay, so back to the X and the Y theory. So there's this other theory. Have you heard of the broken glass theory?
No, tell me.
So did I tell you about that? Okay, so the broken glass theory was an experiment that was done in New York City. And what they did is they took all the police officers in a certain precinct and they took all their uniforms and dressed them in plain clothes. And they were just having like a lot of high crime in this one area. And it was like, I can't remember, it was like what's like the leader of the police force? Like, what's that?
chief of
The
A
chief of
captain or
police. Yeah.
sergeant. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Like, whatever that was. He made this decision and he was like, you know what? I want to try this. And he just like put this little experiment to work. And he took and put all the police officers in plain clothes. And what they found, and just like I'll make it really short, is that they reduced crime by like 60% in that precinct because they they didn't have like this authority, like what you're saying too is like you
mhm.
have this authority saying, you need to do your job. Well, they were going out into the streets, they were shaking hands with people, they were friendly, and he was like coaching them to do that.
Mm.
And I just thought that was so cool. And I was like, God, why don't more police forces do this? And 60%, like in a really high crime area in New York City, like that's pretty significant. And
Mhm.
I don't know why. I can't remember why they call it the broken glass theory. It was something about there was just like less crime or whatever.
No.
But I think, like what you're saying too, like the mindset of the top down. And I've worked in retail before. And I remember one time there's a woman that came down. She was actually a part owner of the company. And she didn't even know how to open the cash register. And I was brand new and I didn't even know. Like, I didn't even know that I shouldn't ask her. I was like, oh, sorry. And she was like, I don't know. She was really just catty and rude about it. And I was like, what the fuck? I was like, you don't know how to open your own cash register in your own business? Like, what the hell is that? I was
Yeah.
just really taken back. So I don't know if you
Well,
have,
I mean, what you're getting at is like, where do people gain their authority and where do they gain like any sense of respect?
yeah,
So if someone like that feels like I derive my respect from my title and my rank on the org chart, then why
yeah,
would that person lower themselves to cleaning out a cash register till? But then there's the other approach, which is eliminating that power distance relationship and saying, I'm going to get my respect by earning the respect and
yeah,
gaining the trust of the people around me. There's an author named John Dixon who wrote a book called Humilitas, which was all about like the evolving nature of humility. To call somebody humble way back in the ancient world was considered quite an insult. But when somebody voluntarily lowers themselves, which is what humility is all about, then it equals that playing field. And as we all know, is a
yeah,
way more powerful force in leadership than trying to rely on a job title.
right.
Yeah, but there's a degree of insecurity in the world. There's a degree of just people who are untrusting, and so that's why when we think about being leaders, we should not think about being managers, and we should not think about title. It's like
Yeah.
who's working the hardest to make life better for everyone around them and to find success as a whole. And there are organizations that are really good at it. And like I said, I'm really fortunate. I think while I've had a tough time finding my fit corporately, I had the benefit of being around people that generally modeled that, which is pretty cool.
Do you want to share what your title is and just a little bit
Oh,
about
sure.
you? And like, yeah, let's get the listeners a little bit more about your
Yeah.
backstory.
So I work for a company called Miller Knoll, and I am vice president of global research and insights. And what that means is that I get the privilege of working with our researchers who are out exploring how basically the spaces around us are evolving to better support our lives within them. And then we also have a group of advisors who help the customers that buy furnishings and textiles from Miller Knoll to go design better spaces. So there's some research in there, there's some design, a lot of social sciences, which I kind of enjoy. But what I value about it the most is that insight helps people make better decisions. And so if we do this right, we should be out there helping all sorts of colleagues inside the company and customers outside of the company to make just more informed, better decisions. And we believe pretty strongly that the design of our physical environments has a huge impact on our lives. So we also like the idea that we're trying to make people's lives a little better.
Ryan, don't you also have a podcast on the future of work?
Yeah, yeah. Actually, we just renamed it. We decided to finally rename it. It was called Looking Forward, and it was really focused on the future of work. And we started it in 2020 or 2021 when we were in quarantine, and I didn't know what I was doing. I still laugh that I was like way too close to the mic, and it's like almost eerie how, you know, I was coming in a little hot on the mic. But anyway, we got some amazing guests to talk about work that really had very little to do with our world. So we had folks from tech companies like Slack. We had the head of Othering and Belonging at Berkeley, John Powell, who I love, and all these people giving voice to where work was going. And then more recently, we started to hear from our listeners, tell us what to do with the spaces. Like we're ready to start making more facility design related changes to offices, to homes, to healthcare facilities. So we just renamed it About Place. And yeah, I'm just started recording the next season, which is season 4. And I've grown to love it. I've been told I have a face for podcasting, so it suits me. But most of all, I just like talking to interesting people.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why we love doing this so much. It really opens doors to get access to people you wouldn't have had conversations with otherwise, which is so much fun.
It is. It is. And by the way, I tried a personal podcast where I was doing this similarly on my own, and it's so much work. So I have so much respect for the fact that you're dedicated to this. My several listeners seem to enjoy the episodes that I could get done. But that one's on the shelf. Like someday I'll pick that one up and maybe keep it going. But yeah, podcasting is a fun medium.
Yeah, if you enjoy it, and you can get the editing done if you don't have an editor or a producer, right? So Heidi is an artist, so she makes all the podcast cards and puts photos on and does all the artwork, which is great. And then I can just like do the technical work. So works out perfect.
Yeah,
That
it's
is
fun.
good.
Yeah,
That
it's
is
going to be
good.
even more fun coming up. I'm going to be taking a AI like photography class, and so making some like really interesting graphics.
I love that.
Yeah,
That's cool.
I'm super excited.
It'll be fun.
What's AI look like in your world these days? Just curious.
Yeah, so I actually dedicated I don't know, 10 or 15 years to understanding the relationship between technology and how we work in our spaces. And so it's not a new concept. I definitely am being asked about AI a lot more these days when the large language models like ChatGPT started to become more readily available. But I find that a lot of people aren't exactly sure, you know, what to even ask about. So in our world, AI, we think about it in terms of how it affects work and the activities that we need to address within an environment. This is really simplistic, but generally, AI can reduce some of the rote, predictable kind of task work within an environment and free people to do a little bit more human centric stuff. So that's not all bad. There's a lot of AI advancements in our buildings, this idea of smart buildings, smart districts, smart cities. Um, and I actually left the world of large corporations to go to a venture-backed startup in 2017 for a while that was in that space. So I had my brief experience at a startup, which sounds like I had a lot better experience than you did, Thaddeus, at mine. But so that whole world I find fascinating. Then there's AI-enabled tools. So that interior designers might use different tools, or as researchers, we certainly have a variety of AI-enabled tools. We got to be pretty careful with the confidentiality of information, so we don't get a chance to use a lot of the off-the-shelf stuff. But it's really just a matter of thinking about how these tools can eliminate some of the more repetitive, predictable, often unenjoyable activities within a job, and then understanding how the environments can support people while they work in new ways. I do
Okay.
think there's a huge need for upskilling. And I could go on and on about that one, but like when I start thinking future of work and AI, it all rests to me with how can we take people who do some of these roles and help them to master the tools that are coming. Actually, I think I can tell a quick story about
Yeah.
one of the companies within Miller Knoll, Herman Miller, where Thaddeus and I both have our roots. Years ago, I remember one of our colleagues, Mark, working on AI bots to help pay our bills.
Hmm.
There were a couple folks in accounts payable who spent a high percentage of their time like taking a piece of paper, like circling this, entering information manually, stamping, and I think this was 2017. Mark proposed, let's have some algorithms do it. And there was a little bit of concern like, wait, pay our bills. What happens if these things add a zero? And his take was, well, if anybody's going to add a zero, it's going to be the person, not the bot. But the agreement was, if we did this, then it'll free up about 40 or 50% of this person's time or these people's time who do this work. And the goal isn't to eliminate either of their jobs. The goal is, how do you take that 40 or 50% and allow them to go do other activities? Maybe it's work with suppliers or others to add more value. And so while there's a really strong emphasis on the term AI right now, I think organizations that are kind of mindful of what's happening in the world have probably, like ours, been working on solutions for a while.
That's awesome. So Space Odyssey 2001 comes to mind. And
Al,
like, well, even just, I mean, the word artificial intelligence, like, so I don't think, are we using that word correctly? Because I feel like artificial intelligence means that we're not feeding it information, correct?
Well, it would mean it's sentient, right? And
Sentient?
so what I think Ryan had the exact terminology. If you want to say that again and kind of describe the difference between large language models
Yeah.
and AI.
whoa, boy, I'm probably not. You've definitely gotten beyond my capabilities here.
Okay.
Um, the large language model, there are different types of what we just use the term AI to refer to. So I think of machine learning where you take a bunch of information, feed it to an algorithm, and it gives you like one answer, versus generative design where you give it a little bit of information and it comes up with a bunch of ideas for you. Basically, the large language models are just that. So if you take Chat GPT, what it's really amazing at is taking words and using words in ways that are extremely advanced. As far as whether or not it's artificial, I do think that this debate, if not outright panic, over what's happening with neural AI networks, basically artificial intelligence algorithms that have the ability to learn and be trained so much faster than we ever expected because they're modeled off of the human brain. I mean, they're essentially biomimicry, um, has caused hundreds of tech leaders to freak out, even Elon Musk, and say, "Hold up, like we have to stop and put some parameters in place here," which so far hasn't been done until the CIOs of the world call up their biggest vendors and say, "I'm not buying anything more until you put some safeguards in place." I just don't think it's going to happen. So there is this dystopian and very concerning side of it. And I find that with any futurism work, and we do some, people will quickly trend towards either optimism or pessimism. On the topic of AI, it's tough because I see both, but it's difficult to not get extreme on either end pretty quickly.
Yeah, it's like the Wild West.
Well,
I mean, it's so many free programs, so it's like everybody has,
Yeah.
access to it too.
But where would we be without Grammarly? You know what I mean? Like
I know, really.
whoever figured out like that I make that many spelling mistakes in my email, just thank you. Like that's the good side. I know the bots will take over and kill me at some point, but until then, life is so much easier.
No, there's a lot of upside, and I think it gets pretty dystopian from the literature that's been kind of presented to us in the movies and everything else. But honestly, like there will be job displacement. And if I think about like going to the airport nowadays, and we go to the airport in Minnesota, and you see the McDonald's is like not staffed now. It's like
I
everyone just
know.
goes to these little kiosks and they order what they want. They put in their credit card or they scan their palm or whatever they're doing nowadays. And then their order comes out to this little window. And so, yes, like I do think with AI, jobs are going to be displaced. It's going to take over some roles, but it's taking over roles that largely like nobody wants to do. And for somebody to just sit back and think like it's going to be like the 50s where I'm an engineer, I'm going to do the same job for 40 years, then I'm going to retire and everything's going to be the same. Like, that sucks because there's like not a lot of variety and then you're stuck doing the same thing forever. And if you don't like it, good luck. people are going to have to learn to adapt and to change as some of this AI comes in, because to me, I mean, we hear about content. I hate the word content, because I'm considered a content creator in some ways. But if you like think of the best book you've ever read, and you wouldn't want to think of that book as a piece of content that someone just like, I'm going to create some content. No, they wrote an amazing novel that
We'll just call you an artist from now on.
exactly. So I think like some of those artist roles, whether it's the art, whether it's advertising and idea generation, like the AI can do a lot of that. And it can do a lot of repetitive tasks. Like as an engineer, I do a lot of repetitive stuff that like I would frankly rather be doing anything else. And I would love it to kind of take on some of that so I can do other things. And I think some people are just afraid to learn new skills and to change what it is they do in the world of work.
Yeah.
When it comes to
I would agree with that. So what's coming to my mind is in the US, we're under 4% unemployment. In 2023, we hit the lowest unemployment rate that we had in 50 or 60 years. There's not really a huge new source of talent. Like generationally, there's not a big new group of people coming in. Our immigration policies are not allowing people to come in that much. So we have to figure out what to do with the workforce we've got. Yet there are job openings that you've got a ton of applicants for, and others that you have so few. So the skills gap and being able to take someone that probably was trained to do something and help them do something else is really, really important. But when it comes to tech, most of us adopt new technology through play. Like if I'm guessing that as you figured out how to be a podcast editor, that you started out just by trying a few things, trying a few programs. Most of the things that we learn in life, particularly since consumerization has transformed our technologies, we have to go have enough sufficient time to play with before we can get any degree of competency. And it's really tough within a job to help people learn that way. So there's a huge market out there for those that want to go help all of the people in the world doing rote, predictable, not very fun work to go learn new tools that can do it. But I think it's unrealistic just to suggest that it'll happen without some sort of intentional upskilling.
I heard a lot of swearing when Thaddeus was playing learning the editing software.
Well, it's funny when our company rolled out Microsoft Teams years ago, I really love the Jason Bourne movies, so I set up a fake project called Blackbriar. If you know Jason Bourne, you'll know that's part of.
Yeah, totally.
And I invited it was like 20 people to this team, and I asked my team members to please spend at least like an hour in there. And one of them was like, well, it's fake. Like, what do you want me to do for an hour? I'm like, anything you want. Create a document, post a GIF or a GIF based on your pronunciation. I mean, just like get in there almost to the point where you're like, I got it. And then we started using it for a project, a few weeks later. But it's tough if like a bunch of people are using a platform. Like I went to that tech startup and they were the most proficient Slack users I'd ever met in my life. And so there I am opening it up for the first time, trying to like just even understand the user interface. It is so intimidating to jump into that for me, it's the way it happens. You just got to goof around enough to the point where you feel like you can use it.
Seems like you'd be fun to work for in a corporate situation.
I don't know. I would hope so. Yeah, I don't know. I would hope so.
So can you describe, Ryan, a little more about like, you kind of said your title and sort of the things that you oversee, but like, what do you see as your role within the company? Like, what are you in your role to actually do for the company?
That is a great question. And I think everybody should almost take a backwards view at the end of their career and just say, like, if I had a headline or a tombstone on my career, what would that be? For me, I probably would say something like I'm a champion for better spaces and a better world. I mean, that's really big picture. What gets me up in the morning is that I feel like if we do our jobs right, we can help create amazing physical environments, and then we can just improve the world around us by the way we do it. More specifically, I this is going to be a weird thing to say, but for me, the most formative professional activity of my whole life was being a high school debater. And as a 15-year-old, I was spending my summers researching topics. And I know debate probably is associated with arguing, but the power of debate is that you have to do both sides. So after you get through a topic and you've argued both sides, you're able to land and go, well, I think I have a little more nuanced view of this, and maybe it's not as black and white as I'd like. And so if I look at what I do today, it's researching and speaking. I do a lot of speaking and a lot of advising with our customers, which is something I really enjoy. But the power in it is to try to think deeply about topics enough to where you can be helpful. There's this quote that's been floating around our research team for years from a German philosopher named Schopenhauer, where he said, the goal isn't to see what nobody else has seen. The goal is to think what nobody's thought about that which everyone sees. So I know I drive my team nuts with this because I talk about this like every time we're together. But my question is always, do we think we've thought more deeply about this than others to the point where we can be helpful to somebody? And if not, we're not there. We shouldn't voice an opinion yet. We got to continue beating up the ideas, never the people, but beating up the ideas to the point where we feel like we can explain them with relative accuracy and that we can help somebody who needs to just, either change their space, or maybe it's somebody within Miller Knoll who's thinking about a strategy or marketing plan or whatever. Yeah, we beat up ideas and we think really deeply about them and we talk about them a lot. And I'm surrounded by really, really bright, creative people. So yeah, for me, I've found it. Like, this was the role. It only took me 25 years.
So it's like, I mean, this is your dream job?
Yeah, in some ways, yes. I mean, if there was some other opportunity where I felt like I could make a bigger impact, I'd go take it. But no, I started out my life thinking that I wanted to be like a marine biologist or an oceanographer. I'm obsessed with things aquatic. I'm surrounded by fish now. I've got fish tats on me, but I wasn't very good at science, so that's limiting. And then later, I thought I might go into nonprofit work or even something like civics and government, and it just didn't feel like the right fit either. I personally came to the conclusion around 2000 that businesses are probably the biggest untapped force of good in the world if we can harness it. The nonprofits, the schools, the arts organizations, they're already trying their best. But what happens if businesses suddenly decide that instead of just making money, like, we're going to go make things better? And so after that realization, I'd stopped considering options outside of business, and the question became, what does a job like that look like? I thought, well, maybe I'll go work for a corporate foundation. But actually, I found that there were all these other opportunities. And one of the best bits of advice that I got fairly early in my career was from this guy named Mark. And he said to me, don't try to come up with some career plan. Our world of work is way beyond a plan. Come up with filters that let you take a look at an opportunity and say, this is a good opportunity or a bad opportunity. And when I was in my 20s, the filters weren't very long. I mean, it was just like, well, is the boss a jerk? Or like, where is it located? But boy, over the years, I've learned that, I've learned that I get bored quickly. So I have to have a job where I have mental stimulation. In this job, if I'm bored, I'm doing something really wrong. I learned that I'm terrible with project management and process management. So I needed something that other people could do that with me or for me. So that ruled out a bunch, and just the filters kept getting longer and longer. And eventually I found a role where I'm like, yeah. Having said all that, I still follow like the CEO of Shed Aquarium on LinkedIn. And every once in a while, I'm like, maybe they need me to clean the aquariums or something. Like, do they need the next dolphin trainer?
Is that the Chicago
yeah.
one?
Yeah,
Shed?
it made
That's
a big
funny.
impression on me as a kid. So there's always that daydream, and I'm not sure there is a right one, but it's the best fit I've found.
That's awesome. When Thaddeus and I were in Boston, he was there for a convention for work this fall, and I was at the aquarium by myself, and I took a selfie, and I'm like, guess where I am? And I sent him this picture. I have the 3D glasses on. I'm at the shark thing. It's so fun.
That's awesome. You weren't looking at an eclipse, you were looking at sharks.
Totally. Yeah, it was really fun. I love all the underwater stuff too. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Being like a marine biologist is always one of those, like, if you can choose what a lot of high schoolers want to be, that's like a top a top thing. And one of our best friends, her daughter is a marine biologist now. So she's living the dream.
Well, I've always benefited from great mentoring, and I actually met a marine biologist fairly early. I think I was still in high school. Who her name was Julie. I still remember this. Who said it's amazing work. You just have to be prepared for almost all of it to be behind a microscope. And I was like, oh, what?
Thought I was going to be training
You're like,
dolphins.
yeah, I'm not swimming with dolphins in the tropics.
Yeah, I know.
It's very
I'm a
misleading.
big believer in mentorship, but I also think apprenticeship, which is almost a lost thing in the business world, is something really, really powerful where you can maybe contribute to somebody else's work and co-author things that help you to figure out what works for you or what doesn't. But I had another leader fairly early in my career suggest to me not to get wrapped up in a specific discipline. Now, I think he was saying it specific to me and my interests, so I'm not sure it'd be true for everyone. But he said, maybe instead of just being in research or development or marketing or digital, maybe you should help to define the areas in between and focus on having empathy for those other disciplines. And so that pretty much guided a lot of my filters as well. I have bounced between disciplines that I think are very closely related. So I've had roles in digital, I've had roles in marketing, I've had roles in research, which I think somebody might look at my LinkedIn profile and think, my gosh, this guy's, schizophrenic in his career interests. But to me, as long as there was a really clear intersection that needed somebody to make all this work a little better, I found that to be more enjoyable. And so that probably was what allowed me to begin to figure out, where the ultimate goal might be.
I love that you brought up mentorship. Do you still have a mentor?
I don't have a formal mentor
Yeah.
anymore, and I actually don't think most organizations or people are very good at mentoring. I have a series of people from whom I seek input and coaching quite regularly, and some of them have been in my life so long that it can be like a text. um,
Nice.
and I try to invest in others. I've been mentoring a young guy who I just think the world of for, I don't know, I guess it's been 5 years now. Um, but no, not one. And anytime I had a formal mentor, I always tried to find somebody who did something really different. I remember there was a lead quality engineer that I was seeking input from because like I said, I'm so bad with like these rigorous process management. I just want to know how he thinks. Wasn't trying to turn my weakness into a strength because I don't think you do that, but I was trying to at least mitigate my weaknesses enough by just understanding the mentality of somebody who does something like that for a living.
Yeah, I think I've I've continuously heard like having a mentor is so important, and I've had a couple throughout my career, but not a lot like official mentors either at work or at, a similar organization that I could tap into. But what I found and what I think is useful for a lot of people is like the mentor relationship is still helpful. And these days, YouTube videos and podcasts, like Bob Proctor, we would consider like one of our mentors, or other YouTubers that are really deep thinkers, that are really philosophical for us in what we're doing, or those that are teaching you how to get something that you want. So like Bob Proctor is really good at how to create a goal, teaching you what are the steps you go through and how you create the goal and then how to reach it. And some of those things are obviously universally applicable to anything that people do, is like creating a goal. And most people who I find that hate their jobs, like they have no goal except like, I want a bunch of money and I don't want to work. And like, that's not a really good goal because that lasts for all of like 6 weeks. And then you're so bored and
Yes.
you need to do something that it's like, maybe you just need a sabbatical or a vacation, but you need
Wait, have you
a
done
goal.
that? Were you bored?
I have not done that. I kind of did. I quit my job in Colorado for this like militant organization before I came to Michigan. And I don't know, I might have taken about 4 to 5, maybe almost 6 weeks off. I was ready to go
Oh.
back and do
Yeah,
something.
but you're probably writing or doing something.
I was traveling around the
Yeah.
West and back of a
And
pickup
learning
truck.
and exploring.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think when I say that people aren't very good at mentoring, one of the things I've noticed is that there's an assumption that whoever is being mentored should be spilling their guts about what's going on in their world, and the mentor should be saying, try this, try this, try that. I actually find that the inverse has been far more helpful in my life. Like, I want to know about what somebody else is dealing with and just hear how they think about it. And that for me is that line towards apprenticeship. So if apprenticeship is bringing somebody on to help with what you're doing to the point where you're almost co-authoring, I have found more value, particularly when somebody in real senior management role is willing to say to me, like, this is what I face on a daily basis. There's been more value in that than
That's
trying to
great.
spill my guts. And I'm a huge history nerd. I've got all these books to the right of me, and a few of them are business books, but the vast majority of them are history. And I absolutely love William McCullough, or David McCullough. Why did I say? Well, I almost said William McDonough. I think because I'm looking at you, Thaddeus. David McCullough's work, and he has a book called "The Greater Journey," which was about all these Americans who, in the 1800s, went to Paris, and the medical students were kind of apprenticed by these doctors, and then the impressionist artists that defined American Impressionism basically were taught by Monet, Manet, and all the other impressionists in Europe. And so there were some scientists like Samuel Morse, and they all came back and transformed how we do things in the States. And every time I read it, I bet I've read this book 4 times. I keep thinking to myself, has apprenticeship been lost? Like, there's trades out there where maybe if I wanted to be an electrician, I could help an electrician, but where do I go help somebody do what they're doing to the point where I get so good at it that I can go do it somewhere else? It's kind of tough to find. You have to have a very special relationship with that person who's leading you.
But I've always heard way back in the day, like early 2000s, Tim Ferriss would talk about like if you want to be an entrepreneur, or you want to do some sort of job, like going to college is fine, but it doesn't teach you how to do the work. It teaches you how to think. And so, yes, now you can think logically, but that's not what you need. So he always recommended like, hey, if you're a young person before you're starting a family, like go apprentice yourself, and you might not make a lot of money or even any money, but that apprenticeship is where you are going to learn so much that then you can take that and go do something else. And I agree. Like we've been encouraging, Heidi's son, who's 19, to do something similar of like, how can you apprentice yourself to learn some of these skills? Because nobody does that anymore. It's like either the younger generation, they want to be managers coming right out of school. I think that's also part of like, they see what their parents went through and how much they didn't like their jobs and sort of like, I don't want that. I want something else. And what we're seeing, I mean, you might be more of an expert on this. Like what do you think we're seeing with the younger generations and the future of work? Like where is work headed, and what do the younger generations coming in, what do they want?
Oh my goodness, buddy. That's a dangerous question to ask me. I could spend the next 4 hours on it. Let me get to a couple of specific things. I definitely think there's a very different view of work right now. And you kind of articulated already, which is most people that are entering into the early stages of their career are not necessarily seeking a real long-term relationship with that employer, and the social contract between employer and employee is a little bit different. Because the tenure tends to be understood by both parties as shorter, the expectations on new employees are actually quite high in many situations, and their expectations of themselves are actually quite high. So sometimes it's helpful just to say, like, hey, we don't have to be in a rush. Like, let's make sure you understand this role and the business and how to be successful. Sometimes I like to suggest that people find a Sherpa or a guide to like just help me understand, or this person understand how stuff gets done. I'll tell you that I have some major concerns about higher education in the States. I think that the incredibly out of whack tuition has created some of that sense of I deserve a really good job right off the bat because we just paid $140,000 for this degree. I'm also concerned about whether or not it's equitable. So I dropped all degree requirements from all of my job postings quite a few years ago.
Wow.
And
That was
uh,
just to interrupt, like I asked HR to do the same thing with a recent hiring that we did, and people were so resistant. And I was like, look, I don't care if they have a college degree. We want somebody who's excited to be here, who's going to stick around a little while and is going to really excel at this work. And you know what, Ryan, like they did it, like for whatever, however hard it was for us to do that. And the person we hired had no college degree, and they've been here for 2 years and they're a rock star. Like it made a huge difference to hire the right person and not hire for the background that is in the degree.
Well, you and I are fortunate to work for an organization that went along with it, because a lot don't. And it has to do with how HR as a function has evolved to the point where degree and years of service are usually the two fastest screeners for a given role. And to say, no, I'm looking for somebody with these qualities or with this particular set of understanding, like how do you filter out those 100 resumes to five? But I remember asking a candidate a while back who had a degree in, it wasn't research, but it was something similar. Like, how do you think your degree has prepared you for a role like this? And I think that was a surprise question. Like, what do you mean? I got a degree in it, but I'm like, well, hey, I'm pretty sure you're smart enough to get through a degree in a lot of stuff. What'd you learn? And so whether it's through internships, apprenticeship, mentors, I just think people should be prepared to say, well, this is how I've tried to prepare myself. If somebody, as an example, went and took, let's just say, a dozen Coursera courses and then did some sort of free internship somewhere, I might find that to be more compelling than a bachelor's degree from a really big institution. But it also takes a degree of psychological safety for the hiring manager to say, yeah, I'll take that risk, because sometimes people need to cover their ass too. Like, okay, the person didn't work out. Well, hey, I got somebody from, an elite school or whatever. So I don't want to sound down on higher education, but um, it's not helping as far as establishing this more kind of nurtured path in the early career stages. We've found that generational frameworks, and you didn't use any, but I'll just throw this out there, have proven to be really awful predictors of most things. So we dropped them from our research in 2017. Pew Research and others have ditched it as well. Like these
So
arbitrary lines between Z, Y, they haven't proven to actually be very accurate. But you start getting into somebody's career stage or life stage, like somebody who's been with an organization for 10 years, just got a mortgage, is going to behave a little bit different than somebody who, well, like take return to office stuff. I mean, we're asked about this all the time. You want to know who shows up a lot to offices? People that don't have an established network. So it might be the new college grad, it might be the 25-year vet who got hired in September, but these other facets tend to be a little bit better predictor of some of these. And so I don't know that I have any strong thoughts about specific generational attributes in the future of work. But what I do think is that as the work gets more spread out and more distributed, the work becomes increasingly digitized. We spend more and more time connecting virtually. Everything we've been talking about is amplified 2 to 5 times. Finding somebody to sit down with you, and just build into you and talk and allow for unstructured, um, kind of informal conversations about how to grow, how to be successful, needed now more than ever. And it happens every summer when organizations hire interns and they're like, well, we're in a hybrid policy and all of our people are everywhere, but the intern is sitting, by herself at a workstation on some floor. Like, I think these are really important themes we're talking about, that if I were a leader of any organization, I would make it a priority. It doesn't mean force everybody back into the office, but asking the question, who's building in to each other in a really meaningful way? Yeah, it's really critical. Most organizations don't have a plan.
yeah, I agree with that. From what I'm seeing, like the digitalization of work and in my opinion, the eventual like virtual reality of work is what's coming. So that when I look out into the future of work, what I see is like people largely, not everybody, but largely don't want to return to the office full time. Like I think 2 days a week in the office, a lot of people are like, yeah, that'd be great because they want that colleague interaction. And it's really hard to do remotely. Like I can tell you, like trying to like grab coffee with somebody remotely, like you can do it, but it's not the same interaction. And so I can see that there's this aspect of it. But what I also see is the impetus and the desire for companies to save money on these big buildings. I still see that as a future constraint. But what I'm seeing is like the virtual reality ability for someone now to put on a visor and to be in, quote unquote, in the office with their colleagues, no matter where they are, and be able to kind of feel like we're in the same room and we can have those conversations.
Are you saying virtual reality
Yeah.
visor? Why are you saying
Like of the
visor?
visor they use for virtual
Like
reality.
a metaversal experience.
Is that what that's called?
Well, it's called Apple Vision Pro or whatever.
Oh,
Is
I
the
I
Apple
was like,
version.
oh, he's putting on a visor. Like, what are you talking
No,
about?
they
Although
put
I've
like
now
a
got the
visor.
Jamiroquai virtual reality song in my head, so that's I like that version too.
So I think like I don't know what you're seeing, Ryan, but like to me, it's like I don't know if it's dystopian, but I kind of see like a lot of companies when this technology is available, which I think a lot of it's available today, we're just not rolling it out yet in the way it could be done, is they'll get people back to the office, but it'll be virtual. So they'll like, it's like going into the metaverse, like Ready Player One, where you're there, you interact, you do the corporate stuff. People feel like they're socializing a lot differently than when they're on a Zoom meeting and through a screen that doesn't feel the same. That's to me, I see that and I don't see it as far away as many people think, but I'm curious what your thoughts are.
We on season 2 of Miller Knowles About Place podcast, we did cover kind of these metaverse working experiences with some depth. So I'd start there. Um, I'm probably a little more optimistic. So what I'm actually seeing is that there's all these headlines that try to emphasize areas of division, but across the world, we're seeing quite a bit of alignment that most employers don't feel like they should force their employees into the office all day, every day, but they'd really like for people to have meaningful in-person experiences. Most employees appreciate the freedom, but are feeling isolated and maybe not a strong sense of belonging or connection with maybe with their own team members, but in particular other teams that they don't see as much. And that they're working through, and it just takes a lot longer than people realize, new working patterns that attempt to bounce some of this stuff. The biggest challenge is actually a trend that you don't hear much about, which is distributed working. So it's not remote. Like remote is this idea that I might be at home or in a coffee shop. Distributed is just spread out. So like I have a team of 25 or 26 people, but there's only 2 or 3 in any given city. They might be in offices most of the time, but just like having the people you're closest to spread out all over the world is really challenging. And so organizations that are more distributed and more global and more connected virtually, um, I'm seeing a major emphasis on trying to find ways of being together more. Even Zoom has asked their people to spend more time together in the office, and they weren't draconian about it. They were just like, "Yeah, we made the tool, but we didn't expect that it was like your only way of living." It's just like if you had a restaurant, you wouldn't expect that people ate there every day. You'd still want to work from home sometimes and have a balance. And so people are figuring it out, and the tools will continue to evolve. But no, I think I'm actually seeing more alignment and encouragement around just spending time experiencing that joy of connection, laughing together. I had a customer say, "We figured out that the real workplace amenity is the people," and I'm like, "Yep, that's.
Yep.
I don't care how many free bagels you got. Like, what's going to get people together are the people. And showing up to a space that's half empty is disheartening. But you can do different, strategies to either change the space or change the cadence of the gathering so that people do get that payoff of quality interpersonal experience when they're together. Um, I'm getting really into our work stuff now, but one of our closest kind of thought partners is a tech company called Atlassian, and they just put out a report called 1,000 Days of Distributed, where they talk at like they measured the positive effects of getting people together. In many cases, even a team gathering of a few days had positive effects lasting 4 or 5 months. It's just so enriching. um, I think what's really happening is that the world realized that many of our work practices, we weren't exactly sure why we did them. There's this book called Art of Gathering by Priya Parker, where she unpacks like, why do we go to a funeral? Why do we go to a birthday celebration? Like, we kind of know, but do we really know like what we're trying to accomplish there? These are gathering rituals basically. And so you can see it happening with organizations right now. They're like, we think we want to spend more time together, but I'm not sure that means like a 45-minute Zoom call with everybody in a conference room. Like there's got to be something else, right? So I tend to trend towards optimism, but I think people are rediscovering the joy of connection while still maintaining a focus on flexibility. But this shit just takes a really long time. My favorite futurist, Paul Sappho, his best quote ever: "Never mistake a clear view for a short distance."
Mm.
Some of this stuff takes so much longer than we'd like. Um, Take VR, you just mentioned VR and AR. These are 40, 45, 50-year-old technologies.
Yeah.
It just takes, or self-driving cars here in Michigan, or you name it. So yeah, we're gonna get there. I have optimism, but the degree of patience and intentionality that it takes to actually work in like a more human-centric way, it's more than most people even want to begin to think about.
I mean, even George Jetson went to work.
I know, and he had Rosie, a robot.
That's so funny. Oh, that's good. I appreciate your optimism with it because we listen to a lot of stuff and it's more dystopian and we're kind of like the rewilding people too. So we like to do a lot of stuff in nature. And so then there's a lot of pushback in like, that contrast between technology and the future and, going back to our ancient roots and going back to nature. So I don't know. I mean, it's just like, it feels like a little bit of tension in that. And I like your way of like expressing like, I don't know, but like, let's stay optimistic and let's see, like, it's about people, right? And it's about gathering and what
Well, and we
humanity,
and we have to
humanity.
shape it. Like
Yeah. Oh
what
yeah,
what
nice.
you're doing, like anything you can do to continue to promote people getting out of these built environments, as much as we love them, and being outdoors is so beneficial. And the pandemic had this weird flip side in that people rediscovered the outdoors in some
Yeah.
cases because it was their only option and they started to view it as healthy and social. I would say the same thing for technology. As an example, if you go back and you look at all the tech predictions from 100 years ago or 50 years ago, they all had a very similar theme. I shouldn't say they all, many had a very similar theme, which is they all forecasted that we would have massive productivity gains and much more leisure time.
Mhm.
So if you just like go look at future of technology in 2030 or 2500, because technology can save on a lot of efficiencies and produce more. There's always been this assumption that people would have more leisure time, and that might be true, like in our personal lives. Like I'm not washing my laundry on a washboard anymore, thank goodness. But work wise, when you gain efficiencies, you've got competition. So what tends to happen is the technology allows you to be more efficient, and then people end up taking on more and more workload. And so we've seen the opposite of most of those predictions happen. So it's going to take some organizational leaders out there to say, hey, we're adopting some new tools, but I want you to maintain a healthy balance. And so let's figure out how these tools can allow you. The term that I use with my team almost every time I send them a note is sustainable productivity.
Mm.
Like that's our goal, sustainable productivity. We want to achieve, we want to be productive, we want to like be the best in a really sustainable way, meaning no burnout,
Yeah.
nobody's feeling like crushed, exhausted, pissed off at each other. I mean, that happens sometimes invariably, but it should still be enjoyable and something that we can sustain over months and years and feel really good about it. So the only way to get there is like if you two and me and others say, this is what we're going to try to work towards.
Yeah. I love how you just said that. Like, let's shape it. Let's be proactive about it. And I mean, I don't know about you, but it sounds like you could do some coaching in Herman Knoll, or Miller Knoll. I always get mixed up. But I don't know. It's really interesting. I get to hear, some things in the house with that is working. And it's,
I mean, yeah, we're not perfect. There used to be this big sign in a project room at Design Yard, the building that I work out of, that said, "Let's make better mistakes tomorrow." Like,
oh,
and
funny.
then with some facility change, somebody moved the sign or whatever. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think
I love that.
that psychological safety to say, boy, we're still screwed up in so many ways, but every day we're trying to like get a little bit better at this stuff is something that we can do personally, as organizations, as
Yeah.
families, whatever. Like that's
Well,
just life, right?
and I got to meet your team before the team that you're on right now, and I got to do a team building project with them in West Michigan because I'm an artist and I do like I'm also a coach, so I do all these fun team building things, and I teach art as well. And it was really fun. And you know what? It was like at the end of the day, it was like just getting all the people to work together and look at different perspectives and see from a different lens. And, like I felt really bonded like with your team. Like I know Gabe. And so when like, people are on the phone, they just talk about people, I'm like, oh, you know them.
Mhm.
And I'm like, I don't, I'm Thaddeus's wife. I don't even work there, but I don't know, it was really fun.
Well,
So
it was one of those things like you're talking about, Ryan, of getting people together that isn't necessarily all about work in a meeting room. We were downtown Holland. We were on a scavenger hunt. We broke up the team into, I think, 2 or 3 groups. And then we had lunch together afterward and talked about it. And we were all over the place downtown doing different things together, working as a team, doing way different stuff than what our skill set was at work. And it, like you said, it helped us bond in ways that we wouldn't have done in a conference room at work, kind of doing anything else. So really
That's
helpful. And
good. I mean, I think trust is gained through those shared experiences. Sometimes those experiences at work can be miserable, but what I love about what you just said is somebody curated some really good positive experiences, and
yeah.
you can bond over that. And I love it when we can do those sort of retreats. I also think it's possible to architect a style of working where there's a lot of those moments, even in the midst of the workday, but it takes some intentionality.
yeah.
So last question, what would you give as advice either to your younger self to have a different experience, or anyone in the corporate world today that's not having the experience they want? Like what's your advice to them that can change their corporate experience, because they might be in here a long time?
Yeah, there's a few things that come to my mind, and some of this I do think that I eventually learned along the way. I just wish I would have figured it out sooner. One is your competencies and your interests are more of a driver than job titles or job functions. And so this is a little bit of a derivative of the advice that I mentioned earlier, but I don't know that any of us should define ourselves by engineer, marketer, researcher, whatever. It's like, what am I really good at and what am I really passionate about? And then I think just looking around and saying, what am I likely going to be able to do that offers the most value? And being quite intentional about that with your employer, I think, is really important. So we all have to do the jobs we've got, and spiraling into a million other things that aren't part of our jobs is not always a healthy thing. But asking the question, how can I offer more value? What am I seeing that I think I could potentially have a hand in shaping? And then being really patient with it. That's probably my biggest regret, is that there were way too many years where I was so impatient with whatever I was doing. And it wasn't so much about title or money for me. It was this feeling that my skills might be under leveraged, or I wasn't, like, I could be doing this. Why am I doing this? But it's like a stew, it's got to percolate a little bit. Like you have to kind of give yourself a chance to mature in each of these roles. And I don't know if this analogy works, but like being in that middle lane on the highway, maybe not like driving 52 in the right lane, but not barreling 90 in the left either. Just kind of like enjoying the journey of being patient with yourself, trying to figure out how to grow, and then constantly looking for ways of adding more value. That to me is the recipe, not just for career success, but for like being able to look back and say, yeah, I think I helped, which is the
Beautiful.
goal.
Yeah, I love that. And
Love
that
that.
I'll let you end with telling people where they can find you. And I just wanted to say, like, the thing about value, my uncle always brought this up to my attention. He's an entrepreneur, he just passed away last year. He would always say, like, as an entrepreneur, like, you have to add value, because if you don't, the company doesn't make any more money. And if you want to make more money, adding value is how you make more money as an entrepreneur. But he said all these people that work for corporations, they don't want to do any extra work. They don't want to add more value, but they always want more money. And he's like, it just doesn't work that way. Like, you have to do something of value that saves the company money or makes the company some money, in some way adding some value to that corporation, which is why I like to think of it, as James True said, like, as a symbiotic relationship. How are you helping the company grow? And if you hate the company you work for, then you need to find a new company that you want to support and help grow. So I think that
Yeah.
adding value thing is huge.
That's great.
I like that. And then what's the company? The company is the people around you. So yes,
Yeah.
you're helping the company make money, but ideally what you're doing is you're looking around, you're saying, I think I can help all of us to be more successful, try to get what we're trying to do done a little bit better. And if that's the motive, that's a good thing. I'll also just say, knowing that you have an emphasis on entrepreneurship, to me, being an entrepreneur is experiencing a high degree of risk for a high degree, primarily of financial payoff. I determined very early, just based on my desire to keep my life somewhat stable but fun, that entrepreneurship was way more interesting to me. Like, I liked the idea that I get to go try new things using a company's money, but that if it hit big, I wasn't going to get rich. I was just going to have the satisfaction of knowing that I got a chance to be part of something. So I think that risk reward tolerance is something that people need to think about and figure out the right place to invest their energies.
Absolutely.
Beautiful. Well, I love this like last moment of corporate sunshine from you. Thank you.
I enjoy my work, and I really enjoyed this conversation, and I'm thankful for both of you. In
Yeah.
terms of where people can find me, I spend way too much time on LinkedIn, so that is definitely the place. Like, if you want to see what we work on, it's millerknoll.com and click on insights. But for me, LinkedIn has been an amazing tool to meet people. I have dozens and dozens of in-person relationships that started on LinkedIn, particularly when we found that people are talking about topics that are of shared interest. So, yep, Ryan Anderson, LinkedIn, and people can feel free to either follow or connect. Either one is fine with me, but I'm always up for a quick hello and an exchange of insight.
What about your podcast, Ryan?
Oh, the podcast is called About Place, and it is also, you can find it along with our monthly webinars, our research articles, and our other work right on millerknoll.com under Insights, or on Apple, Spotify, or Amazon.
Okay. Okay. Great.
Perfect.
Thank you.
That's a wrap. All right.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks so
Appreciate the
much,
plug.
Ryan. Really appreciate your time.